Good morning. As we've been referencing all morning, today we are kicking off our elder selection process, which we do this time every year. So we'll be looking at the qualifications of an elder as they are listed out in 1 Timothy chapter 3. This will be part of our series we've been in 1 Timothy. Now, just in case some of you may think you're going crazy, I know we skipped chapter 2, okay? So last week, Tim finished up chapter 1. We are not totally skipping chapter 2. We're going to go back and pick that up next week, and we'll cover chapter 2 over 2 different weeks starting next week. But we wanted to get this elder selection process started, so we kind of jumped ahead to chapter 3, and then we'll go back and cover chapter 2. That is not in my nature, by the way. I am a go in order, so this feels very uncomfortable. But anyway, we'll make it. I have really been, when we preach this sermon every year, it just means a lot. We were praying in our Sunday morning prayer this morning in the parlor, and it just hit me, so much of the strength and health of us as a church family is tied to the strength and health of our elders. It's a really big deal. And so it's good that we take this seriously. Just as a reminder, I, as a senior pastor, I'm always an elder. And we also have 3 other elders right now who are somewhere in the middle of a 3-year term. Jeremy Henderson. Jeremy, can you raise your hand? Grady Wilson. This is like Elder Row over here, I guess. Grady Wilson. And then Keith Watson over here. Keith, you're out of place. So those are our 3 other elders right now. We'll be bringing somebody else onto the team. We've been a person short. Neil Reinwald was an elder and was set to rotate off now. He had to rotate off early because of a job change a few months ago. So we typically have 5. We've been operating at 4 for the past few months. So that's just a little bit of background, kind of where we're at as elders right now. The idea or concept or topic of leadership is all over the place. There are books and seminars and conferences and webinars about leadership all over the place. I mean, I probably read a dozen articles on leadership just from articles that come into my inbox just this past week. I mean, just everywhere there's ideas about leadership. And so in preparation of this sermon, I just started thinking about leaders that I've had in my own life. Now, I have, at different seasons of my life, I have been around some pretty sharp people. I got to go get a seminary degree for 4 years and was around some very, very smart people. When I was with Youth for Christ, I got to participate in some national ministry initiatives, and I got to be around some high-caliber people. Like the kind of people you might think about when you think about leaders. But as I thought about that, and the leaders who have impacted me, there was one guy whose name came to mind for me. A leader in my life that shaped very deeply for me what it is to be a leader. And that guy's name is Earl. Earl Haynes. A good name? Earl Haynes. Earl Haynes, Josh Dolphin, was a volunteer leader in my youth group. Earl was not cool at all. He didn't dress cool. He was not well spoken. He was not very impressive, right? But I loved Earl. There were 2 things that stood out to me about Earl when I came into the youth group. One is that he always carried around a Mountain Dew bottle. You ever seen these people? I think there's a whole class of these kind of people. They always have like a bottle of soda that they carry around. Look for them, right? They're around. They have a group, I think. He was one of these people. He always carried a Mountain Dew bottle. And number two, he drove an El Camino. That's the car truck thing, is that right? Yeah, El Camino. He drove an El Camino. That's what I first noticed about Earl. But then what else I noticed about Earl is that Earl pursued me as a young 12-year-old punk. Like, I really gave Earl a hard time. But he pursued me. And he loved me. I remember in middle school, my dad would sit me down sometimes and he would do Bible studies with me, which I probably didn't pay attention to. But we were doing a Bible study one time, and we were talking about humility. And my dad asked me, he said, think of one person in your life who's humble. And of course, I'm kind of halfway engaged, so I'm like, I don't know. And he said, what about Earl? And when my dad said that, I said, it made me realize, Earl is a pretty humble guy. He is really humble. Like, what you see is what you get with Earl. That was probably the first moment when I realized, hey, I have a blessing here in Earl. Later on in high school, as I began to kind of really get engaged with my faith, I had a friend who had formerly been in our youth group who really got off the path big time. Ran away from home, was living with some weird guy in a house somewhere. And I remember watching Earl break down in tears over this guy. And Earl came and grabbed me one week and he said, let's go out to this guy's house and tell him we love him and we're praying for him and we want him to see how much God loves him and cares about him. And I'm like, oh, can't do that. That's crazy. But we did. Earl picked me up and we drove out to where this guy was living, my buddy, and we prayed with him and we told him how much we loved him. And in that, Earl taught me how to pursue people. True story, 10 years later, I'm in my mid-20s, sitting in my apartment, and my phone rings one day, and it's this guy, my buddy. And he called me and just said, Ben, I just want you to know that I am walking with the Lord, and I remember when you and Earl came to my house, and y'all prayed for me and showed me how much you cared about me when I didn't care at all. That was all Earl. It was all Earl. Here's why I love Earl as a leader in my life. Because I looked at his life and I said, I want to be like Earl. And I think that's the measure of a leader. You look at someone's life and you say, I want to be like that person. Because those are the people who have influence, whether they're trying to or not. I love Hebrews chapter 13, verse 7, where the author of Hebrews is writing to his congregations about elders, and he says, look at the outcome of their lives and imitate them. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You look and you see what comes out of an elder's life, and you say, I want to be like that person. And that's how an elder is called to lead. It's not because they're cool, it's not because they're impressive, it's not because they're, a CEO, visionary type. It's simply that they live in a way that I want to be like. And I can honestly say that I want to be like Brady. And I want to be like Jeremy. And I want to be like Keith. And list off every other guy who's ever been an elder in this church. I want to be like that. And so I think that's the key mark of a leader, and I think that's why we need to look at elders and make sure we have a healthy picture of what elders are supposed to be, because the biblical authors call us to imitate them, which is really big. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. There's 4 categories and qualifications that are listed here. We're going to hold off just 1 second. There's 4 categories on the back of your bulletin. So we'll just kind of fill those out. There's very, very simple kind of categories. Before we do that, though, we need to make sure we got some of our terms down. Okay, this is really important as we approach Scripture, because the reality is, as you look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 7, you don't see the word elder show up there, right? So how can you do a sermon on elders on a passage where the word elder doesn't show up? Probably a good question to ask. So let's read verse 1, and we'll kind of do a little bit of work on some of this wording, and then we'll get into these 4 categories. Verse 1. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. So we have there a word that's not the word elder, but it's the word overseer. In fact, I think that's the word I put on our title for the sermon today, this word overseer. Now, this word, the way it was used kind of in Roman society at that time, is that it was used to describe kind of heads of state, government officials in Rome. And so this is a word that contains within itself a meaning or a background or a foundation of authority. Authority. This office that we're talking about here, elder or overseer, it is a position of authority. Okay? Very interestingly, I love this reference in 1 Peter chapter 2. This word is used to describe Jesus. Love this verse. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 25 says, "At one time you were all straying like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls." Oh, it's a good verse. And in Jesus, there is this authority and this invitation to come and be shepherded by Him, to belong to Him, to rest in Him. And the only way that an overseer of a local church has any kind of authority or any kind of influence is as they are allowing Jesus to be the shepherd and the overseer of their own soul. Very important. Now, we see this word come up again. This is a really important passage. We're going to bring this up, 1 Peter chapter 5. I think it was Phil mentioned this a minute ago. Let me read this passage to you. I want to leave it on the screen, so I want to point out 3 words to you. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. "So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight." Let's just keep that up there. This is a really important passage to understanding elders. The reason that it's an important passage to understanding elders is because it uses 3 words all in the same passage that all are interchangeable. Okay, so the 3 words that it uses there are elder, shepherd. The Greek word for shepherd is where we get the word pastor. And then you see the word oversight there, which is taken from this word overseer. You see how those 3 words all show up in that passage? All 3 of these words, as they describe the office of spiritual authority in a local church, these words are interchangeable. An elder is a pastor, is an overseer. We have to see that and understand that. We don't use that language as cleanly in our churches today, in a lot of churches. Right? We have like leadership teams, boards. That's fine, whatever. Right? But the biblical categories of the office of spiritual authority is elder / pastor / overseer. And this is the most clear passage where you can see it. And so the office of overseer or elder is one who is called to be a shepherd of a group of people underneath the overseer and the chief shepherd of Christ. Okay. Now, let me go ahead and take that down. Let me make one more mention about a qualification for this office. This is an office, this is a position that is reserved for men. The way that we know that is if we back up a few verses in 1 Timothy chapter 2, Paul clearly states that in the local gathered church, that authority is to be carried out by elders, by men. He says, "I do not permit a woman to have authority or to teach over a man." Okay? So that's the simplest way that we see that Paul references the office of spiritual authority as being reserved for men. Okay? Now look, if you have questions about that, in 2 weeks, I'm going to preach an entire sermon on it. Okay? I'm going to slice it, dice it, up and down, backwards, sideways, all over the place. Okay? So if you have questions about why that's the case and where that starts and stops and all that, could just be here in 2 weeks. All right? We'll cover all that. But for now, suffice it to say that the position of spiritual authority, elder, overseer, shepherd, is reserved for men in the local church. Okay? For more questions, 2 weeks. Okay? All right, so that's background on overseer, elder, shepherd. Okay, so let's look at qualifications. 4 categories. 4 categories. The first category comes in verses 2 to 3, and we'll simply characterize it. Number one on your outline there is healthy character. Healthy character. Verses 2 and 3. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. It's already quite a list. We're not even halfway through the passage, right? So a lot of these words here, a lot of these ideas have to do with character. They all come into the category of being above reproach. Another kind of all-encompassing word there is that they live lives that are self-controlled. Number one, that means that they live lives for others. They don't live a self-centered life. They're respectable. Other people look at their life and they're respected. They're held in esteem. They're held in honor. They're hospitable. The things which they have access to, their resources, their money, their time, they're open with them. So they live for others. They don't have a self-centered life. They have an others-centered life. They also live in moderation. The phrase here is used, they are sober-minded. So they're not given to excesses. Right? And so there's a couple of instances given here. They're not drunkards. They don't abuse alcohol. They're also not lovers of money. They're not greedy. Now we can take that and we can apply that to a lot of things, right? This idea of not being in excess. You can do a lot of things to excess. Things that are not bad in and of themselves, but once you start doing them in excess, they become not healthy, right? Like Alabama football. Or exercise, right? I mean, just pick it. Like John Calvin says, our hearts are idol-making factories. We'll take anything that's halfway decent and good, and we'll just blow it out of proportion and make an idol out of it. Right? That's what it's talking about here. Not taking something that's bad or good, doing it in excess. Right? They're sober-minded. Finally, this is this idea of healthy character means that they approach others with life-giving words and attitudes. They're gentle with people. They're not argumentative. They don't pick fights. They're not bullies. They're not cantankerous. They're patient and kind and gentle. They don't have an agenda that they're unwilling to come off of. This is so key to being an elder. I mean, sometimes in elder meetings, we'll get kind of going on something, right? I mean, it can get kind of, this guy thinks this and this guy thinks that. And so if we had a bunch of like quarrelsome, argumentative guys in there, we would never get anything done. Because you have to learn how to be kind and gentle and honoring to one another, even in the midst of disagreements. There's health in that. Healthy character. Healthy character. That's category one. Category number 2, verses 4 and 5 that we'll read in a minute. Healthy family. Healthy family. Verses 4 and 5. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? So we have here some descriptions about this person's family. Earlier in verse 2, we had another thing about family, that they are the husband of one wife. So what does it mean to have a healthy family? One, it means that this person's marriage is healthy. They are committed to their wife. I love how Peter describes this in 1 Peter chapter 3, where he says that husbands are to love their wives in an understanding way. What does that mean, to love your wife in an understanding way? Number one, it means that you approach your marriage with an understanding of what God's design is for marriage. So that you understand that marriage is not just a contractual agreement, it is a sacred covenant before the Lord. It also means that you understand who your wife is in the unique way that she is designed. And that you love her in the way that God has created her. You nurture her and you care for her and you love her in an understanding way. A husband that's dismissive of his wife or dishonors his wife or speaks of his wife in negative ways before others, that's not someone who would qualify to be an elder. There's also this idea of managing their household well. So they have a job. They provide. They use their resources and their possessions as good stewards. They don't waste money on trivial things. They don't spend all their money on their own hobby and their wife and kids are starving over here. Right? They manage and steward the possessions and resources that they've been given. Their children are submissive to them for the right reasons. The term that Paul uses here is the word dignity. You can get a kid to be submissive out of fear and intimidation. But that has nothing to do with what Paul's talking about here of approaching your children with dignity. Being kind, being gentle, but also being firm with discipline when it's needed. Again, we're back to this sober-minded kind of character quality. A healthy family is a must for a man to be an elder. Healthy family. This does not mean that there's a requirement for an elder that his children are pursuing the Lord. Why? Because no parent can ever guarantee that any of their kids pursues the Lord. You can't guarantee that for your kids. You can do everything you can in your own power to point them to the Lord, but you can't make that guarantee. Right? But it is possible to have a healthy relationship with your child even if they're not pursuing the Lord. Right? That's kind of the idea that Paul's pointing to here. Number 2 is healthy family. Number 3 is healthy faith. Healthy faith. Healthy character, healthy family, healthy faith. This we see in verses 6 and 7. He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. So this is kind of talking about the spiritual maturity of a person. First of all, they cannot be someone who is recently converted to the faith. Now, we're not going to try and put a timeline on that, but really the kind of the point here, kind of the point of emphasis for Paul, is that this is a person who cannot have pride as an ongoing characteristic of their life. This word conceit Paul used here. If a person is arrogant, they can't be an elder. Right, we talked about this a couple weeks ago when Paul begins his letter with these authoritative words, and that this authority is meant to be carried out in a servant-hearted way, not a domineering way. Arrogant people dominate others because it's all about themselves. Elders can't do that. So if that characterizes a person, that person's out. There's no room for arrogance, no room for pride. The second thing that comes out that Paul mentions here is that there is consistency in their faith. So it's very, very, very easy when you're with church folks to look and sound churchy. And then you get home, or then you get to your job, and all that goes out the window. Right? Like a person who does that can't be an elder. I knew of a church one time, back when people still read newspapers. Every time they would go through an elder selection, and the names of men would come up for their candidates for elder selection, they would take a full-page ad in the paper and put all these men's names in there and say, if anybody in the community knows any reason at all why any of these men shouldn't be elders, come tell us. I kind of like that. Because it fits with what Paul's saying here, right? He knows that it's easy to look and sound churchy when you're with church folks. And then you get home, or you get to your place of employment, or you get behind the wheel of your car. And everything goes out the window, right? He knows that. He knows that. And so a healthy faith, one that is seasoned and one that is consistent is a must in elders. Finally, the last thing is healthy teaching. Healthy teaching. This was actually already mentioned back in verse 2. The last thing in verse 2 that an elder be able to teach. This means a lot of things. One, what we're talking about here is being able to teach the scriptures, right? So a person may be able to teach biology or history or whatever, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a person who is familiar with the scriptures, and a person who sees the scriptures as the authoritative word of God, and a person who you would feel comfortable going to ask questions about the authoritative word of God. All right? This doesn't mean that an elder has to be able to stand up here and preach necessarily every Sunday. In fact, if you look later in 1 Timothy chapter 5, he references elders who rule well, and then he kind of makes a distinction about those who labor in preaching and teaching. So he recognizes some elders will labor in preaching and teaching more, and some others will not as much. But every elder has to be able to teach. In other words, they have to be able to counsel others and speak to others in a way that's not based in their own ideas and opinions. Because they realize their ideas and opinions mean nothing. And the only words that really hold any life are the words of God that we find in the Scriptures. It's very important. This is the one distinction, by the way, between elders or overseers and deacons. So starting in verse 8 of chapter 3 through verse 15, we see another very similar list of qualifications of deacons. But deacons are not positions of spiritual authority like overseers or elders are. We'll talk about deacons a little more here in a couple weeks. But just know that distinction is not with deacons. This is a qualification that is reserved specifically for elders or overseers. So those are our characteristics. Healthy character, healthy family, healthy faith, and healthy teaching. So there's kind of two levels of application here. One, as we prayerfully consider over the next couple of weeks the names of men that we put forward for elder candidates, they need to line up with these qualities. Now look here, look. Notice the first word in each of those is the word healthy. It's not the word perfect. Right? No. Nobody has perfect character. Nobody has a perfect family. Nobody's faith is perfect, and nobody's teaching is perfect. Okay, so we're not talking about. I remember the first few times I started being able to go to elder meetings when we were in the transition, pastoral transition a couple of years ago, and I was kind of nervous. Like I'm about to enter into the holy of holies here, right? And I got in there and I was like, man, these guys are just kind of regular guys. No offense, guys, but I mean, these are just regular guys, right? In some sense. I mean, there's certainly guys who meet these qualifications, but they're not perfect. Not perfect, right? There's only one who is perfect, and that is Christ. And that's why I would propose that this whole sermon revolves around 1 Peter 2:25, that for all of us, we were once straying like sheep. But now we have returned to the shepherd and the overseer of our souls. I mean, the way that this thing is supposed to work is that simply an elder is one who exemplifies living and resting in the fact that Jesus is the captain of his soul. That he belongs to Jesus. That he allows his heart and his life and his family and his character to be shepherded by Jesus. That he recognizes Jesus as the overseer and the authority of his soul. That he is submitted to Jesus. And that simply as an elder lives in this way and exemplifies this way, he helps others do the same. I mean, that's really what an elder is supposed to be about. That we, as the author of Hebrews says, we look at the lives of elders and consider their outcome and imitate them. Not because they're anything great in and of themselves, but simply because they're allowing themselves to be shepherded by Jesus. And so that would be my final question for all of us this morning. Where in your life right now do you need to be renewed in being shepherded by Jesus? Maybe it's in your character. All these lists of character qualities that we saw in verses 2 and 3. Maybe it's in your family. As a husband or a wife, as a mom or a dad, as a son or a daughter, as a brother or a sister. Maybe it's in the consistency of your faith. That there's gaps and holes in your faith where there's places in your life where there's no consistency. Maybe it's in your teaching. I know all of us have been called to teach, but we all use words. Every single one of us uses words. We can either use those words to point others to Christ, or we can use those words to not point others to Christ. And so maybe where you need to be shepherded by Jesus today is in your words. Your words to others, your words about others. Where do you need Jesus as your shepherd? I would say one more thing, and I'll be done. Please use the elders. Use us. If you have major struggles in your life, if you have things in your marriage or in your job or sinful habits that you can't overcome, please let us help you. One of the things I love to do most as an elder is to pray over people. James talks about this, coming to the elders and having them pray over you. We want to do those things. We're shepherds and we want to smell like sheep. We don't want to be removed from the sheep, sitting off in some room making mandates and edicts from on high. We want to be in with sheep. Smell like sheep. Use us, please. Let us help you. Let us help you. I'm not saying we have all the magic answers, but I bounce things off of the other elders all the time, getting wisdom and counsel and prayer. We are here for this congregation, and we want to serve this congregation as humble servants. So let us help you. Let us help you. I want to respond to this message with some music. We each week have people on the sides of our sanctuary who are available to pray with you. I would really encourage each one of us to consider this question of where do I need Jesus to shepherd me right now? The service isn't done. Don't check out. Let's sit in this and respond to it. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. And we thank you for how it comforts us when we need to be comforted and how it challenges us when we need to be challenged. Lord, I thank you for the elders of this church. Thank you for the men you've used as elders for years past. Thank you for our current elders. Well, we pray that you continue to help us to raise up elders. And you would protect and guard our elders, their character, their family, their faith, their teaching. Lord, I pray that you would give us clear direction as we open it up to the entire congregation to identify men who meet these qualifications. I pray you give us clarity and direction as to who needs to come onto this team this season. Jesus, we thank you that you are the chief shepherd. And we recognize you as such over this body of believers. We thank you that as the good shepherd, you have laid down your life for us. So that while our souls used to be straying, they are now at rest Thank you. Thank you. It is in your name we pray. Amen.
As we continue to pray, you can remain